And now, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SEAM, Michael Hartkey.
Nice introduction, Sophia. I feel like Jordan in his prime. Boy, how am I going to whip up a frenzy for Dan? So today's topic is officially called R7 2019's Top 7 Risk. But please know that right before the introduction, Dan changed the name of it to A Superhero's Guide to 2019. You see, this webinar is based upon an article that Dan puts on our blog once a year called R7, the Top 7 Risks. But Dan just changed the title because we all believe that if you are attending this webinar, you are a superhero in your own organization. Because after all, you are the ones who get to provide the awareness training. So anyway, today we're going to have another webinar within a webinar. The overall webinar is meant for information security officers, but within this webinar is a separate webinar meant for your directors. In other words, today's webinar is not only about how to provide board awareness training, but we also have a short webinar within the webinar where we present the actual board training itself, if you want to base it on Dan's annual R7 article. We call this a webinar within a webinar concept. So let's just visit the tour page now. Down here on the bottom, we keep all of the movies that we have recorded of these webinars. As you can see, last year we published 2 movies, Cybersecurity for the Board and Providing Board Awareness. The first movie was meant for the board and the second for information security officers. And today's webinar will start off discussing board awareness training in general, and then give an example of the training using the R7 list as the basis of your awareness training. Which brings me to our main speaker for today's event. Can I at least get a drum roll?
Yeah, sure.
The man with 13 letters after his name, the guy who drives all the way home without stopping at one red light, the hero of Robert De Niro, the awareness guru from Indiana, Dan Hattaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you everybody for attending our webinar and for indulging with us as we went through our introduction and we played with the new toys we got for Christmas. And then I can't start without a shout out to Sophia and Michael and a person named Linnea, who is the person you heard do the introduction for Michael. I really like how we're taking our webinars to the next level, and we're always trying to improve on, making these a little less boring. So good job on that. And I also wanted, it's the beginning of the year, so I need to remind everybody of the 7 articles is what we call them. But starting on Thanksgiving, we publish an article called The Magnificent 7, which is really the 7 trends that every financial institution will be addressing in 2018. It's not the 7 risks. The 7 risks is the basis of this webinar today. What the 7 trends are is more, issues that we haven't addressed in the past that are now popping up that, we need to get our arms around. Sometimes they might be issues that return. Maybe a great example of that is in 2005 or whatever, they released the authentication guidance. And so that was a trend that we were all addressing. The risk was a risk long before the guidance came out. But then again, in 2011, they updated that guidance. And so even though the risk had always been there since long before 2005, a trend in 2011 was everybody responding to that new guidance. And so the Magnificent 7 is a great article about trends, and it just kind of kicks off. P7 is the top 7 awareness training posters based on the number of downloads in their history. And so it's kind of an interesting, list of posters. A lot of our clients want to make sure that, they're at least looking at those posters. This webinar is based on an article we write every January. I started actually compiling a list of the top 7 risks when I was asked to present to boards of directors. And I've been presenting to them for a long time now, really since the year 2001 was the first presentation I gave to a board. It was at De Novo Bank. It's how we actually started, working with banks. And then finally, the T7 article is an article compiled by our technical team. And what it is it's a list of the top 7 trend articles we think our information security officer clients should look into, or at least check out, above and beyond the 3 trend articles that Infotex is publishing. Or I don't know, they probably think they're better than our articles. But the long and short of it is that it's a really good article because it kind of helps you be aware of all the trend articles that came out over the Christmas season. And so today, we're going to have a movie within a movie, or a webinar within a webinar. I call it a movie within a movie because by the time I'm telling people about it, it's because it's on our tour page, tour.infotex.com, and movie format. But suffice it to say, the 4 7s was kind of the introduction there. But we then will have a board training video, and you'll have to bear with us. We want to leave some silence before and after the movie within the movie so that it's easier for Sophia to cut out and put the introduction and everything on the movie that you might show to your board. And then finally, there's a conclusion section, of course. I believe we're now really kind of ready to go into, I think we've already taken the 4-7 section. Wanted to just kind of remind you that, there's 2 movies there. And just so you know, last year, when we looked at the number of downloads, it was the movie within a movie that got the most downloads. I mean, we actually have, I guess maybe that's why I wanted to remind myself to go out here, but we also have another movie within a movie. And we actually did 2 movies, but teaching out-of-wallet questions is for information security officers. And so it's, how do we go about teaching our team to ask out-of-wallet questions when pretext callers call them? And there's a lot of reasons why that's a risk, and we'll probably talk about that. But what I want you to know is that then there's a movie within this movie that's basically what you can present to your employees. It's not meant for information security officers. It's meant to be used in your security awareness training. And then we have another one that's unabridged, is what we call it. This one's like about 30 minutes, and this one's like an hour and 30 minutes. And so the unabridged version, we have some clients saying, hey, I love your movies. We use the unabridged version. We make the people who failed the pretext calling test watch the unabridged version, and it helps them. And really what these are meant to do is to get people started on the road of role playing so they can learn how to ask out-of-wallet questions. It's something that you may or may not see as a top risk in your bank, which is something I want to point out, that when we do this board awareness training, we're going over what we see are the top 7 risks in your bank, and that may or may not correspond to your own situation. But what I've heard some of my clients say is that after they present this movie to their board, they then have a discussion about what's different or what they've already addressed. A lot of our clients are proud to feel that, hey, we already addressed the Windows issue, a long time ago. We learned with our lesson the last time that happened, et cetera, et cetera. So it might cue up some kudos in your board meeting if you did present the top 7 risks in your board meeting for the stuff that you do already have addressed. Then finally, I also, when it comes to board awareness training, we want to make sure we give away at least one free board, one free boilerplate in this, and we don't really have a lot to give away other than maybe the movie. But what it is it's just a boilerplate. The starting point, they're not always, the greatest and the latest, but it'll help you if you're still not putting together an annual report to the board, or if you have one but you want to take it to the next level, you want to make sure you're considering everything that could be presented, or you want to see different ways of wording how you are presenting stuff. This is our giveaway for our webinar today. And one of the things I noticed is that we might have a more recent version, and so I'm just going to come in here just to look and see real quick. This is our whole boilerplate set, but no, that is the most recent version. That's very good to know. It's always nice to know that we're ready for these meetings, and I apologize for that little segue, but hopefully Sophia has already delivered that to you. If you watch the movie version of these, of course you don't get the free downloads or the free boilerplates. And so I think we are now ready to start how I would present board awareness training to your board right now. Now, one of the things I want you to know is that what we usually do is, our clients are usually like, hey, I want you to come into the board and I want you to keep it to 20 minutes, or I want you to keep it to 30 minutes or whatever. And sometimes we're presenting audit results in there as well. So a lot of times the last section in the board in our board awareness training might be to go over the results of the audit report and that sort of thing. But I'm on a regular basis now finding people more than happy to give me 30 minutes in the board meeting, knowing that if I do a good job, there might be another 10, 15 minutes of questions coming from the board. And so we're really, seeing the annual board awareness training consuming as much of 45 minutes of that meeting where we go over all the really super huge risks to the bank, which, is usually the loan review, right? But we feel like cybersecurity is right up there next to loan review, even though whenever we look at an enterprise risk management report, we don't see that the rest of the bank feels that way about it. But we are seeing in action, or in practice at least, a little bit more time given to board awareness training than we had in the past, when we, when people would come saying, hey, the board's ready now, they're interested, they're really, they recognize how important cybersecurity awareness is, and so come on in and talk to them, but can you keep your presentation to 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Those days are long gone now. And so this movie in the middle, by the way, is meant for you to be able to present your own board awareness training, and maybe you edit this down. We're okay with that. You can treat it like a boilerplate, where you can retain the copyright to this movie if you modify it for your own organization. We're just wanting to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for you as the superhero of your organization to start that process, or keep that process going, or enhance the process of establishing the right culture in your bank. So, the FFIEC guidance, the way we interpret it since the year 2006, has established the role that the board of directors should play when it comes to cybersecurity. And that was really when they updated the IT security handbook way back in 2006. They've been continuing to fine, tune and really kind of better articulate what the board's role is. But what I want you to know is that what I would like to do with our time here in this movie is to kind of help you understand the guidance more than just read the guidance to you. And so I want to use a metaphor of the canary in a coal mine to help you understand the role that you play as a director in a bank. And so for those of you who might not fully remember this metaphor, there was a time when we didn't have the technology to detect chemicals in the air. And so what people would do in a coal mine is they'd put a canary in the coal mine in strategically located places. And then if they saw that canary was sick, or heaven forbid if it was dead, that would let them know that, hey, there's poisonous gas in the air. We could have an explosion. We could die of asphyxiation or whatever. Let's get the heck out of the coal mine. And so what we really want to talk about today then is, when we talk about the board's role is, are we checking them birds? When we talk about the top risks that your bank is facing, and what really we want to do is we want to let you know that we're going to go over 7 risks that are based on an article that I write every year for my information security officers to help them kind of get a feel for how they compare to other banks that are struggling, against cybersecurity problems. And so from your perspective, really, when we talk about the top risks, we're basically saying, hey, what can make those canaries sick? And then finally, how can you as a board of director member, help the cybersecurity process? And really our answer to that is, maybe you can question your management team to make sure that we're staying focused on the top risks, and that we're doing a good job of staying focused on having the right culture in the bank, and managing our risks well. And so let's kind of dive into what the board's role is. And Mike had mentioned that way back in 2001 I did my first presentation to a board of directors, and what we were talking about way back then was the goals of information security. And so anybody who's studied information security, if you have a certification, from ISAC or ISC squared, or one of the many bodies that provide certifications in information security, you talk about CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, as the goals of information security. And then way back in the day, we would talk about the documentation that was available for the board to review, that the board was approving, that would address these goals. And by the way, I don't know if any bank had a data validation plan back in the day, but we would talk about the need for that. It didn't take us long, maybe by 2002 or 2003, we were adding to the goals of information security, at least for banks, the notion that we have a lot of legal and compliance risk, and we also have a lot of reputational risk. And what I want you to know is that we are throwing this out now. I mean, don't get me wrong, you still should, we still have these goals. These goals are still valid, but when it comes to what the board's priorities are, we would rather you really kind of focus in on the fact that we need to establish a culture in our bank that protects our customers. And the good news for most banks is that you already have that culture. And so really, as a board member, your role as a director is to maintain and continue to breathe life into that culture. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that culture looks like. But it wasn't long, in 2006, the FFIEC realized that, hey, we should probably articulate what the board's role is. And so when they updated the Information Security Handbook in 2006, they really kind of came out with a bullet-pointed list of what the board's role is in terms of the reports and documents that they should be approving on a regular basis, and that should be presented to the board. And it's really where the annual report to the board was born, was in that 2006 guidance. And when we started interpreting that and presenting and teaching our boards of directors what their role was, A, we really liked that we had guidance we can now point to, but B, we kind of divided that guidance into two different roles. One, you need to look backwards, how are we doing on managing our vendors? How did we do in our audits? The contents of that annual report to the board includes, what incidents did we have? What disasters did we have? What, hopefully there wasn't a lot in it, right? But, what kind of vendor issues are we facing? And what were the top results of our risk assessment? And then we divided the other half of that guidance into what the board needed to do looking forwards. In other words, we need to approve policies as they arise. We need to review the results of our risk assessments and making sure that we agree with where our risk profile is in relationship to our risk appetite. We need to, as board members, approve new technologies that are going to expose the bank to more risk. And then finally, we need to approve the IT audit plan, which would usually back in the day would be the contract you had with your IT auditor. There wasn't really a lot of, RFPs going out to auditors or, hey, this is our audit risk assessment. Can you develop an audit plan based on this? No, the audit plan was what the auditor provided to the board. And so we, again, this is good to know, and it's important for you to realize this, but, here we are, 12, 13 years later, and I believe that you really get this, but are, we keeping our directors focused in on where the true benefit is, which is, are we protecting our customers? Are we checking them birds? We've done a lot to get to here, right? We've done a lot to get to here, but are we looking? Are we losing sight? Are we looking for sick birds? And then in 2015, all of our information security officers had to kind of step into a paradigm shift and look at everything a little bit differently, because the FFIEC released the Cybersecurity Assessment tool. They call it a voluntary guidance, and then they spent the next 4 years going around making sure that everybody volunteered to follow the guidance, which we as information security, cybersecurity professionals thought that even though it was kind of weird, it was still a good thing, because we feel like our clients are substantially more safe now than they were prior to the Cybersecurity Assessment tool being released. But you, as a board member, had a role to play. They spelled out a 5-step process that you had to go through, and then once a year, you're supposed to update your cybersecurity risk appetite statement, which at least gave us an FFIEC suggested method of establishing what our risk appetite is based on inherent risk and residual risk. The proverbial maturity levels is really the residual risk side of that cybersecurity risk appetite statement. But ultimately, if you're thinking, well, what is that again? It's something your ISO, your information security officer, leads you through on an annual basis, but don't worry if you don't remember exactly what it is, because your role is to ask the right questions of the information security officer when they do present some of the complicated stuff, which can sometimes be, the best question can sometimes be, all right, so how does this data flow diagram that you're saying you have to do help us protect our customers? And by asking the information security officer to articulate that, you are now establishing the dialogue that needs to be established to make sure that we're remembering what this is all about, which is protecting our customers, not the diagramming of how our data flows through the system. Your role is to make sure that we're checking for sick birds. Now, having said that, I very often had, when I first started taking that metaphorical approach to helping the board understand their role, had some regular questions that came back, which really kind of was best asked when one of the board members asked, well, speaking of, how do we tell whether the birds are sick? What should we be looking for with our management team? How can we tell whether we have sick birds just by asking questions of our management team? And so I reduced that down to 3 focus areas. If you're thinking, well, what kind of questions can I ask? Questions centered around audit readiness. How are we doing on our audits? Are our auditors having to ask a lot of follow-up questions, or are we giving them everything that they need when they first show up? How do we plan for our audits? Are we just doing what Infotech said they used to do in the old days? Are we just taking the auditor's 3-year proposal, or are we actually developing an audit plan based on a risk assessment, that sort of thing? How does our audit process protect our customers? Likewise, awareness training. Are we encouraging our employees to come to management when they think they might have screwed up? Self-reporting is very, very important, and the culture for self-reporting is often established by the directors, not middle managers or branch managers. And so if an employee feels confident that they can walk into your branch manager's office and say, hey, I think I just handed out the wrong information to the wrong person when they called and asked for it, because I didn't ask out of wallet questions, or because I didn't properly, know who they were. If our employees feel comfortable coming in and saying, I think I just clicked on a link that might put malware on my computer, we have the culture that's going to help us respond to incidents quicker, better, and really will actually avoid incidents from occurring in the first place. And then, beyond this board awareness training that you're receiving by watching this movie, is your information security officer adequately notifying management of what their role is, the technical team of what their role is? Are we doing a good job of making sure that our vendors understand the type of information they're receiving and that they're required to protect that information? And then the hardest part, how are we making sure that our customers know their role in cybersecurity without frightening them? How do we enlighten, not frighten our customers? And then finally, and this is really kind of segue into my next section here, but are we managing these new risks? How are we doing against the top 7 risks that Dan Hadaway is presenting in that movie that you asked us to watch? Would be a good question that you ask in your next board meeting. And so metaphorically, what can make us sick in 2019? Now, we're talking about the majority of our audit clients and our managed security services. We watch bank networks. The majority of those clients are under $1 billion in size. So I want to make sure you realize that. But each year, we kind of get together, we talk to our clients, we look at our audit results, we look at what's going on in the real world, and we modify a top 7 risk list. And then I write an article about it in January. But the reason we started doing this is because when our information security officer clients started asking us to come in and present to their board, they usually, when it was, what should we talk about, beyond what your role is as articulated by the FFIEC, right? We usually would default to, well, what is everybody else facing? What are the risks that smaller community-based banks, primarily in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, and Michigan, what are they faced with? And so this is our risk list for 2019. And one of the things I want you to know is that it starts with kind of a sarcastic remark by Dan, I have to admit. But Microsoft, in the 21st century, Not only do we get to release software that's buggy and that doesn't work before we even sell it, but now we also get to announce when we refuse to fix it anymore. Okay, and so because of that, I've kind of sarcastically coined the phrase, "This is Microsoft's next denial of service." It's not really a malicious attack by Microsoft, but what they're basically saying is that Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008 are being sunset. They're not going to support it anymore. They want you to upgrade to their newer operating systems so that they can focus all of their security development on those operating systems. And you know, I mean, you know, let's face it. I mean, it has been around for a long time. We've more than, you know, in Microsoft's eyes at least, we've more than achieved our return on the investment we placed in these operating systems. They are going to stop their extended support a little less than a year from now. And so how is your bank doing against this? I mean, what is your bank doing to make sure that we don't have systems out there that are not being properly patched? If you haven't already started, now's the time to start. If your network engineering team has been talking about what we call a virtual desktop environment, right now might be a good time to invest in that, since you have to update all of your operating systems anyway. But be ready, because hopefully we're doing a better job this year than we have in previous years, or, you know, the previous times that, you know, Microsoft, you know, retired their operating systems. But no, and remember that you were getting audit findings a year, 2 years after, you know, these operating systems were sunset, because you had vendors that were still needing to update their operating systems. And so, you know, your information security officers are trying to get their arms around that. They're trying to get out ahead of that. The second big risk is targeted attacks. This is a risk that has been on our risk list for quite a while. We're getting more and more frightened by it now. Again, we feel like, you know, the bad guys are realizing that banks are hardened, so now they're going after your customers, and they're succeeding. And I'm not just talking about your corporate account customers now. We're talking about, you know, your commercial, I mean, not your commercial, but your retail customers, the people that might have, you know, a lot of money in their account because they've worked their whole life to save that money, and for some reason it is now available over the internet. And, you know, I feel like we should blame the bad guys, but, you know, I've heard somebody say in the past, I can't blame them. Look how much money they can make. They're making more money than the good guys, is what I hear people saying from time to time. And so one of the things that they're doing, the third big risk is, you know, malware's great grandchildren. This has been on the list since we first compiled it. I mean, when I went into, well, I mean, maybe not the great grandchildren, but when I went in to present it at De Novo Bank in the year 2001, we talked about viruses as being one of the top risks. I don't remember that specifically. I just know we did, because we've been talking about it since we started our company in the year 2000. We've been talking about it since, you know, the early 1990s when we first started doing risk assessments. And now it's deploying all of the same technologies that we're, you know, trying to deploy in our bank: big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. And so because of that, you know, one of the big trends that banks are facing right now is really taking their patch management system to the next level. And really, if you want to have a good non-technical explanation of what we mean by vulnerability management, go out to my.infotex.com/patches, and it uses the metaphor of you bought a brand new car and now you got a recall on it, right? And so unfortunately, there's a lot more recalls in the application world than there is in the auto world, but the metaphor works pretty well to help understand what's going on with patch management. Now, patch management, we're learning, is not good enough. We need to have testing. We need to have a policy that requires, you know, what do we do with the results of those tests? We need to make sure that not just the technical team is aware of what's going on, but if we've got systems that we can't patch, maybe we ought to let their managed security service provider, the people who are watching your network, know that, hey, we've got vulnerabilities here. Can you write signatures that look for exploits of these specific vulnerabilities? And then, you know, we got to tweak the system. We've got to prioritize, especially in the larger banks. You know, what are we going to tackle first? You know, we got to make sure it's a risk-based approach towards managing vulnerabilities. We've always had user awareness issues on our top 7 risks list. A while back, we started, crossing off may and putting in the word will. 70% of incidents are still initiated by user mistakes. Your users are usually going to the wrong web page, or they're clicking on the wrong link, or they're giving out the wrong information to the wrong people on the telephone. The good news is that most banks are realizing we need to encourage our employees to self-report. We don't want to beat up on our employees because they made a mistake. Even the best of us make mistakes. We're busy people. We multitask, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this year, you're going to notice, hey, there's more than 7 wristbands going over. And the reason why is because we combined the users and the vendors. There was about 9 risks, and we combined a couple of the perennials that we go over every year. And, one of the things that you need to realize as a director is it's the local vendor that we're given a chance to, who our customers don't forgive us for. If the mistake was made by a national player, the first time we saw this was the Heartland payment system breach way back in 2008. Our customers forgave us when it was a national player. But if it's our local network support provider, or the shredder company, or a cleaning company that makes off with a bunch of information, tries to sell it on the internet for $90 a name or whatever, those are the breaches that our customers are not so forgiving for. And so we do need to make sure that we're keeping a good eye on our vendors, and really learn from what we're seeing out there with our vendors. We now are in the age where our customers know what an incident response should look like, which really makes our decision-making process a little bit easier, because we can be more transparent, because we're seeing that the companies who are transparent, who are honest, who admit to their mistakes, are the companies that are looking, they're turning lemons to lemonade. And so as a director, what I feel like you should realize is that as an auditor, we think the best way to test a bank's posture is not through awareness training, is not through penetration testing. We feel if a bank can do a good job of responding to incidents, and so if you have third parties come in and facilitate tabletop incident response testing, where your entire management team is involved, the real incident response team is involved. If the board needs to be notified, we actually involve a board member so we can see what it feels like when we're notifying the board, et cetera, et cetera. These are the organizations, if they pass their incident response test, that are the most prepared to turn lemons to lemonade when, and not if, an incident occurs. And so, what the board needs to realize is, when we're in an incident, what is the number 1 priority? What's the board's role? What's the board's role in cybersecurity? What's your role in an incident? Well, it's the same. Are we making sure that we protect our customers? What we learned from the Equifax incident is that if we don't give customer protection the top priority, and we give other things a higher priority than that, it becomes very evident in an incident. And so what we need to realize is that the reason why we're in an incident in the first place is because we kind of failed a little bit on protecting our customers. And so the way we respond to that will exude whether or not that was a mistake or a result of us not really giving priority to protecting our customers. And so really the sick bird that we need to look for is, do we know when there's a potential for misuse? Because if we don't understand that it's all about potential for misuse, then the incident response team is not ready to turn lemons into lemonade. And boy, did Equifax teach us, how that can really destroy our reputation, even if we put protecting our reputation as the top priority. I feel like the main thing that we learned, and selling the stock and then disclosing really wasn't as much protecting their reputation as it was protecting the bank accounts of the primary shareholders. But still, we all now don't trust Equifax anymore. We all know that they really don't put their customers as the top priority. Which brings me to another scary risk that's in the top 7, which is the attacks on your customers. The good news is this used to be like number 1 or number 2 for the last 3 or 4 years. We're kind of lowering it in priority because there's other fish to fry. But do know that this personal account takeover, which originally looked kind of, benign. It didn't look like it was that big of a deal. And the reason why is because everybody was going after the corporate accounts. And, there was a lot of people out there still naive enough to fall for a business email compromise where, somebody poses, they actually get access to your CFO's Hotmail account or their AOL account or whatever. And then they send instructions to the people who are responsible for transferring money to those people. And then next thing you know, the bank is dealing with this big problem because they've got a corporation that's missing $50, $60, $100,000. Well, we're seeing that starting to, now that we're doing a good job of educating our corporate customers, we're seeing the focus starting to switch over to our retail customers. And so the personal account takeover is becoming as scary as the corporate account takeover. And one of the things that we're worried about is what we call pretext calling. And so there's really two severities that come out of pretext calling risk. And what we're talking about here are people calling up your branches and asking for information that they're given without properly being authenticated. So in other words, a nosy neighbor could call up and find out how much his neighbor is making if we don't properly authenticate the nosy neighbor. That's already been scary enough, but banks have usually saw that as kind of a lower impact severity because it really only affects one customer at a time. It's kind of a nuisance. It's kind of a pain in the butt. We've always maintained, hey, there's a drip of messaging going out to our customers saying that we're not really as secure as you thought we were. And we feel like that over time that's going to hurt your reputation. But now we're starting to see the bad guys are populating databases just by calling our banks, asking how much money their customers have, and now they know who to try to attack with their personal account takeovers. And so one of the things that your information security officer might be wrestling with this year is teaching their employees how to use out-of-wallet questions. It's a lot easier said than done, but you might have customers come up to you saying, boy, I called the branch and, wanted to get a payoff on a loan, and they started asking me what the collateral on the loan was. Well, the reason why is because we want to make sure that you are who you say you are, and if we don't recognize your voice, which, is harder and harder in this, information age, we might have to authenticate you with out-of-wallet questions. A lot easier said than done. But, you might hear already of people being asked for the amount of a recurring deposit or, the amount of their last deposit or, whatever. So, and you might be surprised to know that we can't use the mother's maiden name anymore as a form of identification. We can't use the last four of a social security number or an account number because you can find an account number on a check or you can find it in the mail or you can find it, by calling a bank and asking for it, unfortunately. And so these are, really important educational risks that your information security officer is addressing in 2019. If you'd like, more information, we have a couple articles out there that are meant for directors, r7 at infotext.com, my.infotext.com/patches. And with that, I'd like to just kind of dive in really quickly into how do we go about making sure that we are fulfilling the board role? And that's just basically by focusing in on, the questions around these three areas here is where we would start. But really, what we're talking about is, again, how does this protect our customers? And so anytime you're at a meeting where somebody presents a technical report, and you're at a loss and maybe it's your turn to ask the question or whatever, it's so easy to say, well, how does this actually connect back to the protection of our customers? I mean, we can ask questions specifically about these three areas, but when in doubt, how do we protect our customers? Mike, are there any questions from the audience in general?
No, there are not any questions today, Dan.
Okay, great. Well, I think I'm ready to turn the webinar over to you.
Great information as always. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sophia. And thank you all for joining us today.
When you view an Infotext webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the webpage listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoText presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoText webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoText reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.